People often say that in the Middle Ages, folks slept alongside their animals. Whole families shared the same bed, or that sleep was a luxury only the wealthy could afford. Today, we're going to dig into how our ancestors really spent their nights and bust some of these myths. Sleep, that thing that takes up about a third of our lives, was something very different back then. It wasn't just closing your eyes and waiting for morning. Rest in those days wasn't just a passive thing or a biological need. It was a cultural practice shaped by faith, money, hygiene habits, and even superstition. Come with us on this journey back in time to see that medieval sleep was much more than simple rest. It was a complex mix of necessity and tradition. We'll explore how people practiced segmented sleep, what kinds of furniture they used, the sounds and dangers that filled the night, and how all of that made their nights feel pretty strange to us today. Get ready to rethink how you see your own nights. Before you settle in, take a second to like the video and subscribe. Also drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always cool to see who's joining us from around the world. I'm Nighttime Scribe, and my goal is to take you on a unique journey as you get ready for a good night's sleep. Imagine a time when night wasn't seen as one long block of sleep, but split into two separate periods with some awake time in between. This was called biphasic or segmented sleep, and it was so normal in the Middle Ages that people just thought of it as regular sleeping. They didn't aim for a straight 8 hours like we do now. Instead, they'd have a first sleep lasting a few hours, then stay awake for 1 or 2 hours, and finally go back to sleep until dawn. That awake period wasn't wasted time by any means. People would get up to pray, think about their dreams, quietly chat with their bed partners, take care of basic needs, or even do some small chores by candlelight. For some, it was a moment of spiritual reflection. For others, a chance to socialize before going back to sleep. There's plenty of proof this was a real habit. You can find references in the literature of the time, like in the Tales of Canterbury and Chaucer, where characters are described getting up after their first sleep. It also shows up in personal diaries, legal records, and church council documents, like the one from Tours in 567 that set rules about what monks could or couldn't do during that night vigil. All this shows biphasic sleep wasn't just a weird quirk, but a widely accepted cultural norm across medieval Europe. The main reason for this split sleep pattern is the huge difference between medieval life and ours, especially one big factor: artificial light. Back then, once the sun went down, it was nearly pitch dark. There were no streetlights or electric bulbs to keep the night alive. Candles were expensive and oil lamps gave off only a weak glow. So for most people, night meant enforced downtime. Doing many tasks was impractical, risky, and costly. This lack of artificial light actually helped people's bodies sync up more naturally with the day-night cycle. Without constant light distractions, the brain and body naturally adjusted to light and dark. When the sun set, melatonin kicked in, making people sleepy. Then, after a few hours, the body's chemistry, with no light to stop it, would cause them to wake up briefly before falling asleep again until morning. Segmented sleep wasn't a choice, but a natural, logical way humans adapted to life without electric light. That awake period between sleeps, sometimes called the watch hour or cock's first call, after the rooster's morning crow, was far from wasted time. Instead, it was an active and meaningful part of the night, used in ways we'd find unusual today. Darkness became a kind of refuge, a private space for quiet reflection in a world that was noisy and busy during the day. For many, the night watch was just an extension of daily work. Housewives would often wake to rekindle fires that had died down, keeping homes warm and ready for cooking at dawn. In rural areas, animals needed care at all hours. People checked on herds, repaired pens, or quietly handled small tasks. And of course, everyone had to relieve themselves, usually meaning going outside or using basic chamber pots. Imagine the whole family waking up in the dark to do these things, moving carefully so as not to wake others in the house or village. Oddly enough, what we now think of as a lonely night was also a time for socializing and closeness. Medieval homes, often small and shared by multiple generations or extended families, offered little privacy during the day. The night watch gave couples a rare chance to whisper, share worries or hopes, and even be intimate. It was the perfect moment for connection, when daytime noise and distractions were gone. Records even show neighbors or relatives sometimes made nighttime visits for emergencies, carrying lanterns to discuss urgent matters that couldn't wait until morning. For a deeply religious society, the night vigil had special spiritual meaning. The darkest hours, when the world was asleep and distractions gone, were believed to be the best time for prayer and meditation. Many people knelt beside their beds or in quiet corners to recite psalms, read scripture, or just be with God in near silence. Monks and nuns, for example, had their own set times for prayers during these night vigils. This wasn't just about devotion, it was also a way to find comfort, guidance, and strength in a world full of uncertainty. Not everything stopped at sunset. For some trades, night was actually prime time to work. City watchmen, the sergeants, were the guardians of the dark, patrolling streets to prevent fires, thefts, and other dangers. Bakers got up well before dawn to prepare fresh bread for the community. In certain industries like textiles, where some crafts needed constant attention, weavers often took advantage of the quiet night hours to keep working, usually by the dim light of a candle or lamp. This night labor was an economic necessity that went against the usual stillness of medieval nights. The calm of night also gave people valuable time for personal reflection and study. Those with access to books or manuscripts, whether monks, scholars, or a few privileged lay people, used this time to read, write, or think deeply without interruption. It was a moment for introspection, letting the mind wander or focus on complex ideas. One of the most fascinating and uniquely medieval practices was interpreting dreams. Dreams weren't just random thoughts, but seen as messages from God, warnings, or glimpses into other worlds. People commonly woke up from their first sleep and, if they'd had a vivid dream, checked dream books or divination guides to understand what it meant. These guides, often ancient, mixing Christian and pagan symbols, offered meanings for all kinds of images, from animals showing up to teeth falling out. Waking in the dark to think about dreams was a way to seek advice, understand fate, or prepare for what lay ahead, adding a mysterious, deeply personal layer to the night vigil. The biphasic sleep pattern, common for thousands of years, didn't disappear overnight. Instead, it slowly faded because of social and technological changes that shifted how we relate to light and time. The Industrial Revolution was the biggest driver behind this change. As factories popped up and work ramped up, the workday stretched beyond natural limits. To maximize productivity, strict long shifts became the norm. There was no longer room for peaceful night vigils, when the body had to be ready for constant work. But the game changer was artificial light. First gas lamps in the 1800s and then electricity. Electric lights turned night from a dark, quiet time into an extension of daytime. Suddenly, streets and homes were brightly lit, allowing social life, business, and fun to go on late into the night. Cities became lively, even after dark. Night stopped being a time for broken sleep and quiet reflection and became a period of non-stop activity or entertainment. Modern life values deep, uninterrupted sleep and sees any night waking as a problem or inefficiency. With constant light and the demands of a straight workday, the human body gradually adapted to monophasic sleep, a single solid block of rest. The old idea of first and second sleep faded, now just an interesting historical footnote. Still, traces of those old sleep habits remain today. The siesta is probably the clearest example. Found in many cultures, especially in warm regions like the Mediterranean, Latin America, or Asia, the siesta is a short daytime nap, often after lunch. While today's siesta is often linked to escaping midday heat or recharging for the afternoon, some historians and scientists think it echoes our original biphasic sleep habits. Before strict work schedules and universal artificial light, the body likely adapted to natural breaks in rest. One main sleep at night and a short drop in energy during the day. Though today's siesta differs in timing and context from the medieval night vigil, the idea that our bodies aren't necessarily built for 8 hours of non-stop sleep, but rather for rest spread throughout the day, rings true with our ancestors' wisdom. The siesta might be the last lingering reminder of a once common way of sleeping, a sign of how culture and technology have shaped one of the most basic parts of being human. When we think about the medieval bed, it's easy to fall into romantic ideas or assume extreme poverty, but the reality, as usual, was more complicated and tied closely to a person's social and economic status. Where and how someone slept was a clear sign of their rank, comfort, and sometimes survival. The materials used for beds varied a lot depending on wealth. At the bottom of the social ladder, for peasants and most people, the mattress was usually just a sack stuffed with straw. Straw was cheap and easy to get, but had problems. It got compacted fast, became a perfect home for fleas and bugs, and had to be replaced often to keep some hygiene and comfort. Often, these straw mattresses were placed right on the ground, sometimes covered with an animal hide or rough cloth to help keep out moisture and cold. Moving up the social scale, the quality of bedding improved quite a bit. Artisans and small merchants could afford mattresses stuffed with wool. Wool was softer, warmer, and lasted longer than straw, though it still needed airing and cleaning to avoid smells and pests. At the top levels of society, the nobility, high clergy, and wealthy merchants, beds reached real luxury. Their mattresses were filled with feathers, a clear sign of wealth. Feathers, often from geese or ducks, made soft, warm, and very comfortable beds for the time. These feather beds could be so thick and plush that you practically sank into them, offering a level of comfort most people couldn't dream of. When it came to bed linens, the same social hierarchy applied. The poorest people used rough cloth sacks or coarse wool blankets to cover themselves. The middle class could afford linen or higher quality wool sheets. For the wealthy, fine linen sheets, often embroidered along with rich wool or even silk quilts, were standard. These fabrics didn't just keep people warm, they also showed off wealth and style. Noble beds often had canopies and curtains, not just for privacy and warmth, but also as a dramatic display of status and power. Sleeping furniture in the Middle Ages was much more than just a place to rest. It reflected social rank, practical smarts, and the constant battle against harsh conditions. Canopy beds symbolized luxury and status. They were a dominant, impressive piece in any noble's bedroom. Having one in aristocratic, royal, or high clergy homes wasn't just for looks. They served important purposes we might overlook today. First, they were a clear sign of status. Canopy beds, often carved in detail, draped with brocade, silk, or velvet, and lavishly decorated, showed off the owner's wealth and influence. In a time when big, open rooms were common, a canopy bed marked a private space of authority. Monarchs would meet guests and ambassadors while seated on their canopy beds, turning them into informal thrones. Besides symbolism, they offered much-needed privacy in homes where walls were few and families, and sometimes their servants often slept in the same large room. Heavy canopy curtains could be pulled shut, creating a cozy, private nook inside a huge chamber. This gave the occupants a chance to talk in private or simply escape constant eyes. The curtains also helped protect against insects, mosquitoes, and flies that were a constant nuisance. They also blocked drafts sneaking in through poorly sealed windows and doors in cold castles and mansions. Perhaps most importantly, in big, unheated rooms, the curtains helped trap heat. In winter, stone-walled rooms could be freezing. Closing the canopy curtains created a microclimate around the bed, trapping body heat and warmth from any nearby brazier or heater. This made the canopy bed a warm, comfortable refuge from the chill. Compared to the fancy canopy beds, most people's beds were rope beds. Surprisingly simple but effective, rope beds marked a big step in sleeping comfort. The basic design was a simple rectangular wooden frame. Instead of a solid slatted base like today, the frame had holes or hooks along the sides. Through these, hemp, flax, or leather ropes were woven or tied tightly, forming a stretched network. On top of this rope net sat the mattress, straw, wool, or, for wealthier folks, feathers. The tight ropes provided flexible, breathable support, lifting the mattress off the floor and improving airflow. This helped keep the bed dry and reduced bugs. The English phrase, "sleep tight," is believed to come from the need to tighten these ropes regularly. Over time, the ropes would loosen, making the mattress sag and feel uncomfortable. It was a regular chore, maybe in the morning or before bed, to tighten the ropes and keep the bed firm. So, sleep tight didn't just mean sleep well, it meant sleeping on a bed with properly tightened ropes. Rope beds evolved over time. Legs were added to raise them. Frame designs improved, and eventually ropes were replaced by wooden slats or metal springs, paving the way for modern beds. But for centuries, the simple, practical rope bed was the main sleep solution for most medieval people. Medieval sleeping setups weren't limited to rope or fancy canopy beds. Necessity drove creativity, and people adapted to what they had, making sleep solutions that might seem odd today, but worked perfectly back then. In rural areas, especially cold ones or places with small, poorly insulated houses, a clever and popular piece of furniture was the wardrobe bed, or closed bed. Imagine a mix between a wardrobe and a bed, a wooden box or small room with sliding or hinged doors that enclosed the sleeper. These beds were perfect for several reasons. First, they provided serious warmth. Being fully enclosed, they trapped the sleeper's body heat inside, giving great insulation against cold medieval nights. Second, they offered solid protection, not just from drafts but also from insects, rodents, and to some extent, noise in shared living spaces. Finally, and importantly, they gave much-needed privacy. In homes where multiple generations or whole families shared one room to live and sleep, closed beds gave each person a small, personal sanctuary, something very valuable in a society where daytime privacy was almost non-existent. For the poorest people, a proper bed was out of reach. Millions of peasants, beggars, and serfs often slept right on the floor. That might mean just a thin layer of fresh straw or a couple of rough blankets laid over packed earth or wooden planks. Sleeping close to the ground meant dealing with cold, dampness, bugs, and filth, making rest rough and often interrupted. But sleeping on the floor wasn't just for the very poor. It was common during travel or military campaigns. Soldiers, pilgrims, and travelers spending the night in inns or makeshift shelters often had to make do with the floor, using cloaks or sacks as pillows. A tough reminder of the hard life on the road. Versatility was crucial in medieval homes, where every piece of furniture had to do double duty. Benches used for sitting during the day and large chests storing clothes and goods often turned into makeshift beds at night. Wooden benches, though hard and uncomfortable, gave an elevated surface off the floor, which was already a step up. With a few blankets or a thin mattress added, they became a place to rest. Likewise, chests with flat, wide lids were great for stretching out on, especially if packed with clothing or textiles that offered some padding. This kind of setup was common in small homes where space was tight, and daytime furniture needed to double as beds at night for everyone living there. These makeshift solutions highlight the practical and often tough reality of medieval sleep, where comfort was a goal but functionality was essential. The idea of having your own bed, an exclusive personal space to rest, is actually a pretty modern one. In the Middle Ages, sharing a bed wasn't unusual but extremely common and practical, driven by limited space, the need for warmth, and safety in numbers. It wasn't shameful or rare, it was a social norm across all classes. While sharing situations varied, the most common was, of course, within families. In small, often one-room houses, it was unthinkable for every family member to have their own bed, so parents and kids usually slept together. This not only made the best use of limited living space, but also provided valuable body heat during cold medieval nights when heating was scarce or non-existent. Plus, being close offered a sense of security in a world full of dangers: wild animals, intruders, diseases, or harsh cold. Kids especially benefited from the protection and warmth of their parents. In manor houses, castles, and especially inns, things got even more interesting. It wasn't unusual for servants to sleep in the same room as their masters, sometimes on mattresses on the floor or benches near the lord's main bed. Their presence added warmth, security, and immediate help if needed during the night. But what might surprise us today was the common practice of sharing a bed with strangers in inns. If a traveler arrived and all beds were taken, the innkeeper would often place them in a bed already shared by others. Because beds were scarce and expensive, space was used to the max. There were unspoken rules. People slept clothed or in underwear, kept respectful distance, stayed quiet, and respected others' belongings. Often, inn beds were bunks or large platforms where guests lay head to foot to save space and avoid direct contact. Necessity outweighed modesty or privacy, things we now consider fundamental. Finally, sharing beds was most organized in monasteries and pilgrim hostels. Monks and nuns slept in communal dorms, in individual beds or small cubicles, but always in shared spaces under the watchful eyes of superiors or God. This encouraged humility, community life, and mutual care, especially in hostels along pilgrimage routes like the Camino de Santiago. The idea of personal sleeping space simply didn't exist. Pilgrims, tired from their journeys, crammed into large common halls, sharing benches, makeshift beds, or just the floor, showing the camaraderie and humility expected on their spiritual journey. So medieval beds were often shared spaces, reflecting a society where the group mattered more than the individual, and necessity shaped rest habits. The modern idea of personal private space, especially for sleep, was basically unheard of in the Middle Ages. Privacy as we know it today was a luxury most couldn't afford and often wasn't even wanted by the elite, whose lives were mostly public. Life back then was marked by a big lack of privacy. Houses were small, spaces were shared by extended families, servants, and even animals. Rooms for specific purposes didn't exist. One space might be a kitchen, dining room, and bedroom all in one. Doors, if any, rarely locked, and intimacy was very different. Bathing was communal or rare. Personal hygiene happened openly or semi-openly, and conversations were out in the open. This constant togetherness was normal, and expecting privacy was rare, because there was no separation, no real bedrooms like today. Beds were found in great halls, kitchens, anywhere with room and some heat. For most, sleeping was just part of communal life, not a private activity. This reflected a mindset where the individual was closely tied to the group. Even for lords and nobles, the rooms used for sleeping weren't the private bedrooms we imagine. Though more exclusive than common halls, they were still semi-private and often open to guests, counselors, and servants. The lord and lady welcomed guests, advisors, and servants into their chamber. It was where they dressed, ate, held meetings, and even handled matters of justice. The canopy bed's curtains offered some visual privacy, but sounds and the presence of others were constant. This room was a symbol of status, but also an extension of their public role and court life, where social hierarchy showed itself even in simple acts like sleeping or getting ready for the day. Because there were no dedicated sleeping rooms, the bed wasn't just for rest. On the contrary, it was the heart of family and social life in a medieval home. People didn't just sleep there, they ate meals there too, especially in winter to make use of the warmth near the fire. It was a gathering place where families and friends talked, shared stories, or played games. The bed also played a key role in life's major moments. It was where women gave birth with the help of midwives and other village women, and sadly, also where people died, surrounded by loved ones in their final moments. So, the bed was the stage for life, from birth to death. A multifunctional piece of furniture that captured the essence of medieval living. If you're still with me this far into the video, I hope you're already subscribed to the channel. I'm Nighttime Scribe, and my goal is to build a big community of people who love the night and knowledge. Thousands from all over the world, connected by that deep desire to learn more, understand themselves better, and live fuller lives. I always say, knowing history is key to avoiding past mistakes. So please take a moment to subscribe and share this video with your fellow knowledge lovers. And if you feel generous, leave a super thanks for this humble servant. Either way, my gratitude for sharing this moment with me is endless. Now, let's get back to the story. If privacy was an unknown concept, silence was even rarer. The medieval night was far from the peaceful haven we long for today. It was a constant mix of sounds, alive both inside and outside homes, and a stage for dangers lurking in the shadows. Imagine walls that were not only uninsulated but often just symbolic dividers. Soundproofing was a luxury that didn't exist. Everyday night sounds created a steady cacophony. In rural areas, the lowing of cows, neighing horses, bleating sheep, or grunting pigs often came from animals kept in the same space as people, seeking warmth and safety. Dogs slept at the foot of the bed. Cats prowled for mice. Hens might roost in a corner of the same house. Added to these were outside noises, wolves howling in nearby woods, frogs croaking in marshes, or the non-stop buzzing of summer insects. In cities, the atmosphere was different, but just as noisy. Church bells marked the night hours without fail, from the matins call to midnight chimes ringing through alleys. Night workers, bakers starting early before dawn, or weavers using quiet hours to focus, created rhythms that slipped in through windows. Carts and wagons creaked over cobblestones any time, and watchmen's calls announcing the hour were constant. On top of these outside sounds came the noises of those sharing the space. Snoring was an unavoidable soundtrack in rooms with multiple sleepers. Coughs, sneezes, occasional moans from children or the sick, and quiet conversations of those waking for nighttime duties. All these sounds would overwhelm us today. The ability to tune out that noise, to rest amid such chaos, was a skill born of necessity. Silence was a rare, fleeting luxury, experienced by very few and only on special occasions. Beyond the constant noise, the medieval night was full of real dangers that made sleep a mix of vulnerability and acceptance. Rest wasn't just necessary, It was an act of faith that dawn would come safely. Threats in the dark ranged from tiny irritants to catastrophic events. The fight against unwanted roommates, rats and mice, was ongoing and affected sleep quality. They scurried through walls, under floors, and across roofs, chewing food, contaminating supplies, and spreading disease. Their presence was so common that their scurrying and damage became part of the night environment. Insects were even more personal and annoying. Fleas, lice, and bedbugs were almost everyone's constant companions, no matter their social class. Their bites caused non-stop itching, breaking up sleep and causing pain and discomfort. People fought them with simple methods, sprinkling aromatic herbs on beds, using repellent plants, or just enduring the misery. Cleanliness as we know it was limited, and fully getting rid of these pests was impossible. Nights often became a literal battle against these persistent attackers. Fire was, without question, one of the greatest fears and dangers of the medieval night. Most houses were wooden with thatch roofs. A stray spark from the hearth, an unattended candle, or a neglected brazier could spark a blaze within minutes. The risk was always there and very real. Cities with tightly packed buildings and no organized firefighting were especially vulnerable. A fire in one house could quickly destroy a whole neighborhood or even an entire city, wiping out years of work and lives in a single night. The fear of fire was constant, and families took precautions, making sure all flames were out before bed, though the danger never fully disappeared. Darkness also gave cover to crime. With little public lighting and limited patrols, thefts and assaults were real risks. Doors and windows, often simple and weak, offered little protection from intruders. Rich people were prime targets, but even the poor could be robbed of their few belongings. Travelers spending the night in inns or the countryside were especially vulnerable. Nighttime danger made families huddle together, as more bodies meant more safety. Finally, nature itself was a threat. Storms with thunder, lightning, and heavy rain could be terrifying without modern comforts or strong buildings. Leaky roofs, poorly fitting windows, and flimsy walls turned storms into ordeals of discomfort and worry. Floods from swollen rivers or heavy rains could destroy homes and crops, forcing people to leave their beds in the middle of the night. So the medieval night was truly a time of survival, a period full of cold, pests, noise, and real dangers that made sleep fragile and showed human resilience. Medieval nights weren't just filled with real dangers, they were also full of fear and superstition. Back then, science was just starting out, and religion shaped how people saw the world. Darkness became the perfect backdrop for popular beliefs, omens, and supernatural stories. Sleep, a vulnerable state, turned into a battleground between the mind and unseen forces. Nightmares weren't just seen as byproducts of heavy digestion or stress, but as experiences with deep, often harmful meaning. People truly believed they were caused by demons tormenting sleepers. The most notorious were incubi and succubi. The incubus, a male demon thought to lie on women as they slept, was said to seek sexual contact and cause suffocation or sleep paralysis. The succubus was the female version, visiting men. What today we understand as sleep paralysis or apnea were back then seen as real demonic attacks. People woke up terrified, convinced these evil beings had visited them. Interpreting these nightmares was important, so people often turned to priests or wise elders to figure out if these dreams were divine warnings, temptations, or bad omens. Beyond personal demons, darkness itself was feared. Without artificial light to chase away shadows, night was literally the realm of the unknown. Every shadow or strange noise could be wandering spirits, tormented souls, or evil creatures. People believed witches held secret meetings under the moon. Werewolves roamed the woods, and all kinds of terrifying creatures came out at night. This fear wasn't just fantasy, it was part of daily life and popular stories. Tales of nighttime encounters with the supernatural were common and kept people cautious and afraid of the dark. To protect themselves from these unseen threats, medieval folks used a variety of rituals and charms. Faith was their main defense. It was common to hang crosses over beds or doors and draw sacred symbols on walls. Prayers were said before sleep to ask for protection, but superstition ran deeper too. Amulets were very popular. Blessed objects, relics, or simple things like herbs or animal teeth were placed under pillows or sewn into bedding to keep evil away. One interesting practice was sleeping with a knife under the pillow. While it might seem like protection from thieves, for many it was mainly to guard against supernatural beings. In many cultures, iron was believed to repel evil spirits and fairy creatures. So the knife wasn't just a tool, it was a protective charm. Even how the bed was arranged had superstitious meaning. Some medieval people avoided sleeping with their heads pointed north, believing that direction attracted death or bad luck. This might have come from old pagan beliefs, or the idea that the north represented cold, darkness, and the underworld. On the other hand, sleeping with your head facing east, toward Jerusalem or the rising sun, was preferred, symbolizing rebirth and hope. In short, medieval nights were full of imagination and fear. Sleep wasn't just a physical rest. It was a journey into a world where the real and supernatural mixed, and people looked for comfort and protection through faith, rituals, and charms against the unknown. The connection between hygiene, health, and sleep in the Middle Ages was very different from today. What we now see as basic cleaning and personal care was limited, often non-existent or misunderstood, which had a big impact on rest quality and parasite spread. Taking showers or daily baths, like we do today, was almost unknown. Hot water was rare and expensive, and when people cleaned themselves, it was usually sporadic and shallow. This limited bathing had many effects. Bathing was a rare event, maybe a few times a year for common folks, and more often for the wealthy who could afford tubs and heating water. When baths happened, it was common for several people to use the same water, which didn't clean but could actually spread dirt and disease. People's ideas about hygiene and health were very different. They believed hot water opened pores and let bad air or sickness in, so frequent bathing was discouraged. Instead, people focused on cleaning their hands and face, using damp cloths or rubbing their bodies with aromatic herbs to cover smells. Because full baths were so rare, dirt and sweat built up, creating an environment perfect for parasites and causing body odor that today would be unacceptable in shared spaces like beds. Fleas, lice, and other parasites were common and a constant part of life. They lived in clothes, on skin, in straw mattresses, and in cracks in walls. Flea bites were a constant nuisance, causing itching that disrupted sleep. Lice in hair and on the body were just as common, causing irritation and discomfort. Bed bugs hiding in bed cracks and coming out at night added to the misery. Without modern insect sprays or disinfectants, medieval people had to rely on traditional remedies to deal with these unwelcome guests. But one of the most common practices was using aromatic herbs like lavender, rosemary, mint, or wormwood. These herbs, known for their natural ability to repel bugs, were scattered in the straw mattress, hung in small sachets near the bed, or rubbed directly onto skin or clothing. While they didn't completely get rid of parasites, they helped reduce their presence and annoying bites, plus made the often smelly environment a bit more pleasant. Battling these tiny invaders was a daily struggle, and their impact on sleep quality and continuity was clear. Deep, restful sleep was often just a dream amid constant irritation. The search for sleep in a world full of noise, dangers, and parasites led medieval people to try a variety of practices and remedies, some based on experience, others on superstition, and many that seem downright bizarre to us today. Medieval medicine, based on the theory of the four humors, strongly influenced these sleep aids. The medieval night was a real challenge for getting rest, so different methods were used to encourage sleep. Herbs were a key part of the medieval medicine cabinet. Opium, made from the poppy, was known and used for its strong sedative and pain-relieving effects. Though risky and addictive, it was given in small doses to ease pain and help with sleep. Wild lettuce was another popular choice, valued for its mild calming effects and often brewed as a tea. Other plants like valerian, chamomile, or hops were also used, either mixed into drinks or placed near the bed to soothe nerves. Drinks played a role too. Warm broths, herbal teas, or even small amounts of wine or beer were consumed before bedtime, not only because they relaxed the body, but also because alcohol, even in small doses, was believed to help lull the body to sleep. For many, prayer was the simplest and most comforting remedy. Before sleeping, people recited prayers asking for peaceful rest and protection from nightmares and night demons. Faith was a powerful source of calm in an uncertain world. Alongside these more practical methods, some exotic remedies existed that sound pretty wild to us now, but were taken seriously back then. These often mixed popular tradition with an early, and sometimes mistaken, understanding of medicine. One example was mixing wine with eel bile, considered a sleep-inducing potion. Animal bile, loaded with mystical and medicinal meanings, was believed to have special powers. Mixing it with wine was thought to boost its sedative effect, though the results were probably more placebo than real. Another strange practice was rubbing bear grease on the feet. Bears, animals known for hibernation and deep sleep, were seen as symbols of rest. People believed applying bear fat to the feet, a part of the body connected to the earth, would transfer the bear's sleep qualities to the sleeper. Of course, this was more folklore than science. Finally, medieval medicine based on humoral theory, the idea that health depended on balancing four humors, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, used invasive methods to restore that balance and promote sleep. If insomnia was thought to come from too much blood or bile, like black bile causing sadness and sleeplessness, bleeding and purging were prescribed. Bleeding meant drawing blood, often by cutting veins or using leeches. They believed reducing blood volume would fix the imbalance that was keeping people awake. Purgation involved taking strong laxatives or vomiting agents to cleanse the body of extra humors through vomiting or diarrhea, although now known to be harmful and counterproductive. These were common treatments for chronic insomnia. They show how desperate people were for good rest and how limited their understanding of the body was. Health and bodily balance in the Middle Ages went beyond remedies and hygiene. Even sleeping positions were carefully considered, believed to affect digestion, humor balance, and vulnerability to supernatural dangers. Sleep posture wasn't just about comfort. Medieval doctors often recommended certain positions based on humoral theory. The common belief was that the body was a small universe controlled by the balance of four humors. Keeping these humors balanced was key to health, and sleep position was thought to help maintain that balance. Some doctors recommended side sleeping, specifically on the right side. The idea was that lying on the right helped food move toward the liver, which was seen as central to digestion and blood processing, making digestion easier and keeping the humors balanced. This position was also thought to prevent cold humors like phlegm from building up in the chest, which could cause breathing problems. Sleeping on the back was seen as risky and discouraged. Medically, it was thought to slow digestion and cause humoral buildup, leading to indigestion or excess phlegm. But the bigger fear was supernatural. Lying on your back was believed to make you more vulnerable to nightmares and demonic attacks by incubi and succubi. With chest and face exposed, people thought they were easy targets for these spirits. Because of this, many avoided sleeping on their backs and preferred the side position for protection. This mix of medical advice and superstition shows how closely health and fear were linked in medieval times, even influencing how people slept. The medieval bed wasn't just a place for birth and rest. It was also where life often ended. Dying in bed was a natural part of life, filled with religious and social meaning, very different from today's more medicalized and mostly hospital-based view of death. In the Middle Ages, the idea of a good death was extremely important. It wasn't about avoiding death, but facing it with dignity and spiritual readiness, and the bed was central to that process. A good death meant dying peacefully, having confessed sins, received the last sacraments like the anointing of the sick and the Eucharist, and having full assurance of the soul's salvation. It was considered a blessing to die in one's own bed, surrounded by family, allowing for the necessary rituals and farewells. Dying suddenly, like in an accident or without the chance to repent, was feared because it was thought to threaten the soul's fate. So great care was taken to have the dying at home, attended by loved ones and prepared for their journey to the next life. The deathbed was a public, communal place. Family presence was essential. Children, spouses, siblings, and close relatives gathered around, praying, comforting, and witnessing those final moments. It was a time of deep grief, but also family unity and renewed faith. Alongside the family, the clergy played a vital role. A priest was called to give the last sacraments, hear confession, and offer absolution, making sure the soul was in God's grace. This ritual was crucial, and the priest's presence turned the bed into a temporary altar where the spiritual battle for the soul took place. So dying in bed was a serious communal and spiritual event. High infant mortality was a sad, ever-present part of medieval life. Many children didn't survive past early childhood due to disease, infection, and poor hygiene. This tragedy was so common that, painful as it was, it became part of how people understood death as an unavoidable and constant part of everyday life. People were used to death being around. It wasn't distant or taboo. Death happened in homes and on streets and was experienced at young ages. Children saw siblings, neighbors, and animals die. This familiarity didn't erase the pain but shaped a different way of seeing life. The bed, being the place of birth, life, and death, held this whole life cycle, reminding us that in the Middle Ages, eternal rest was as certain as the nightly sleep. Outside of homes and inns, some medieval places had strict rules about sleep, driven by discipline, devotion, and community life. Monasteries and convents are the best examples of how rest was turned into a spiritual tool. Monastic life was built around prayer and work, and sleep was no exception. Rest wasn't a luxury but a necessity, strictly managed to maximize time for devotion. Life in a monastery or convent followed the canonical hours, a series of 8 prayer sessions spread through day and night. This meant monks' and nuns' sleep was broken up and disciplined. The most demanding was matins, held in the dead of night, usually between midnight and 3 a.m. This forced the religious to get up in total darkness and cold to attend church for long periods of chanting, reading, and prayer. After matins, they might get a short chance to sleep before the next service, lauds, at dawn. This routine created a 2 or even 3-phase sleep pattern, not because of lack of artificial light, but because of religious duty. Sleep time was tightly controlled and often less than what we'd consider healthy today. The body was expected to be disciplined, and staying awake at night was seen as a pious sacrifice. Privacy was almost non-existent. Monks and nuns slept in communal dormitories, large halls with beds or, earlier on, straw mattresses lined up in rows. These beds were sometimes separated by curtains or low partitions, offering minimal visual privacy but no sound protection. Austerity was key. Mattresses were straw or wool, bedding plain. The goal wasn't comfort but function and humility. Light was dim, usually just one oil lamp or candle, and silence was mandatory, broken only by snores or coughs. Life in these dorms encouraged discipline and watchfulness, making sure everyone followed the rules and schedule. For the religious, the night vigil wasn't just a break between sleeps, but a deeply meaningful spiritual practice. Rising in the dark to pray was an act of devotion, symbolizing watchfulness over the soul and readiness for Christ's return. Nighttime hours were believed to be best for contemplation, meditation, and communion with God. Away from daytime distractions, monks and nuns spent this time in silent prayer, reading sacred texts or doing acts of penance. This discipline strengthened their faith and helped them develop a rich inner life. The vigil was sacred time, an opportunity to draw closer to God through sacrificing sleep and focusing in the dark. So monasteries showed an extreme, highly organized view of medieval sleep, where rest was secondary to spiritual discipline and community life, turning the night into a path toward salvation. Within the medieval social hierarchy, castles and courts showed their own sleep habits, sharing some traits with broader society, but shaped by status, security, and political life. At castles, night was a time of constant watchfulness, even for the most powerful. The king's and queen's chambers were the ultimate example of the canopy bed, luxurious, richly decorated, and meant to impress. But despite their grandeur, these rooms weren't fully private like we think of today. They were semi-public spaces where audiences were held, ambassadors received, and important decisions made. Often the monarch, the king or queen, rarely slept alone. Their personal attendants, like ladies-in-waiting, pages, chamberlains, and guards, often slept in the same room or nearby, always ready to help or respond to emergencies. This close proximity wasn't just for comfort or service, it was also about security. Having a loyal retinue nearby was a form of protection against possible conspiracies, assassination attempts, or unwanted intrusions. A monarch's life was like a non-stop performance, and even rest followed those rules. Even in the privacy of their bed, the royal figure was surrounded by symbols of power and trusted people. A castle's security relied heavily on its night guards, who worked tirelessly. While the court slept, guards patrolled walls, courtyards, and hallways, staying alert for any sign of danger. Sleep had to be fragmented and light out of necessity, often taken in short shifts and in makeshift spots like benches or near doors. The night vigils in castles weren't just religious, they were vital military and security measures. Sentinels in towers and at main gates stayed awake all night, senses sharpened by darkness and silence, listening for unusual sounds or watching for suspicious lights in the distance. Changing the guard was a ritual repeated throughout the night, to make sure watchful eyes never rested. This constant vigilance was crucial for the castle's survival, making the night tense and alert for those responsible for protecting everyone else's sleep. So sleep in castles and court settings was a complex mix of luxury, security needs, status, and non-stop watchfulness, a reflection of power and danger at the top of medieval society. The medieval night was a stage for shadows, not just physical but spiritual too. The ever-present Catholic Church shaped not only daytime life, but also the most private moments of sleep. For medieval men and women, closing their eyes wasn't just about resting the body, it was embarking on a journey of the soul, vulnerable to both heavenly and demonic forces. Before darkness fully took over, prayer marked the shift from day to night. It wasn't just a habit, it was armor. Families said prayers, often the Our Father or Hail Mary, asking for protection of both body and spirit. This same prayer was repeated at dawn to thank God for a new day and for surviving the dangers of the night. Prayers before sleep acted like a shield against the darkness, a pact with the divine to protect the soul during those hours when reason faded and fears grew stronger. Flickering candles were the last light before entrusting oneself to God in the vast night. Preparing for sleep was really preparing for death. In a time of high mortality, when disease and accidents could take a life at any moment, each night was a small reminder of one's final breath. People tried to lie down in God's grace, which usually meant confessing their recent sins. Dying with unconfessed sins could doom the soul to purgatory or worse, hell. So sleep became a nightly rite of purification, a time to examine conscience and, if possible, clear guilt before darkness brought its uncertainties. It was an act of humility and sacred fear, a constant reminder of life's fragility and the nearness of divine judgment. But not everyone slept. The vigil was a key practice, especially in monasteries where the canonical hours set a rhythm of continuous prayer. Monks rose in the dark, often before most lay people even fell asleep, for vigils and lauds, morning prayers that sanctified the night. This devotion wasn't just inside monasteries. Some lay people, driven by strong faith or penance, kept vigils too. They spent hours in personal prayer, deep meditation, or small acts of charity at night, believing that stillness and darkness brought them closer to God. The vigil was a sacrifice, taming the body to lift the spirit. Dreams themselves were a spiritual battleground. They weren't just mental images, but messages, visits from angels or saints offering guidance, warnings or comfort, or temptations and deceptions from incubi and succubi causing nightmares and impure thoughts. The church, as authority, often decided how to interpret dreams. There were specialized clerics, and common folks sought their advice or used dream manuals, hoping to understand divine will or fight evil influences. A vivid dream could change a day, a week, or a life, pushing someone to act or be extra cautious. Even sleeping could be sinful. Sloth, shown as too much sleep, was a deadly sin, stealing time from prayer and holy work. Sleeping too long was seen as spiritual weakness, a sinful indulgence pulling the soul away from its divine mission. On the other hand, nocturnal lust, uncontrollable erotic dreams or emissions caused deep guilt. Though the church debated if these were sins or involuntary, many felt shame and sought purification. Insomnia wasn't always a sin, but could be seen as a lack of faith or a sign the soul was troubled by unconfessed sins or despair, stopping it from finding rest and peace only God's grace could give. Sleep was, overall, a mirror of the soul's state, a small version of the battle between good and evil that shaped medieval life. Life in the Middle Ages was a fragile dance with illness and death. Not a day went by without the shadow of sickness, wounds, or plague-threatening life. This constant danger shaped daytime life and deeply affected sleep, often turning it into a rare luxury or a vivid nightmare. For the sick, sleep was a fantasy. Burning fevers tortured the body. Sharp pains or coughing made rest impossible. Without modern painkillers or cures, when sleep came, it was broken, filled with fever dreams, and interrupted by pain. Family or caregivers stayed awake all night, watching every breath, giving basic care and praying for relief that seldom came. The sickbed was a place of suffering, far from the peaceful refuge the healthy sought. Fear of contagion and epidemics, like the devastating Black Death in the 14th century, completely changed how entire communities slept. Death could strike suddenly, sometimes overnight. People went to bed not knowing if they or their loved ones would wake up. Fear of infection made many isolate themselves, sleep alone, or avoid close contact even at home. Contemporary accounts describe silent cities at night, not because of peace but out of terror. Sleep was invaded by anxiety, the creak of a funeral wagon or the tolling of church bells for the dead. In that world, any rest was just a temporary truce in a never-ending battle against an invisible enemy. Medical treatments of the time, instead of helping restful sleep, often made it worse. Practices like bloodletting, draining blood, or purges that caused vomiting or diarrhea weakened the body, causing discomfort and making it hard to sleep. While some sedative herbs like poppy were known, dosing was unreliable and side effects could be severe. The goal wasn't deep, continuous sleep, but quick symptom relief, with little concern for patients' rest. People went through these treatments hoping to get better, but often ended up with more suffering and sleepless nights. When illness inevitably ended in death, dying at the bedside was both a family and public event. Unlike today, death wasn't hidden away. The wake, the original meaning of vigil, was a serious ritual. Family and neighbors gathered around the dying, sometimes for hours or days, staying with them in their last moments. This vigil had many purposes: to honor the dead and pray for their soul, to confirm that death had truly occurred, and to protect the body from desecration. It was an act of love and community, where sleep was sacrificed to ensure a dignified spiritual passage. Finally, sleep was a powerful metaphor for death in the medieval imagination. Literature, art, and theology often described dying as an eternal rest or sleeping in the Lord. Sleep was a little death. The body lay still while the soul might wander. This deep connection between sleep and death influenced how people viewed their nights and offered comfort. If sleep was practiced, then death was the ultimate rest, a release from pain and struggles in a scary world. To really understand medieval sleep habits, we have to drop our modern ideas about time. Back then, time wasn't a strict grid of minutes and seconds on digital clocks. It followed nature's rhythm, shaping how people slept. Before mechanical clocks became common in later centuries, life was ruled by natural time. Sunrise started the workday, noon marked the middle, and sunset signaled time to rest. The seasons changed how long days and nights lasted, which affected when people worked and slept. Summer nights were short and busier. Long winter nights meant longer and often broken sleep. Church bells were the main timekeepers, calling for prayers and dividing day and night. This connection to the sun and the church created a flexible sleep schedule tuned to light and biological needs, far from today's rigid alarm clocks. Within this natural rhythm, the canonical hours played a key role, especially in monasteries. Monks' lives were strictly scheduled around 8 daily prayer times from dawn to night. Vigils and lauds happened in the dark, forcing monks to wake up in the middle of their rest for prayer, a practice that broke up their sleep into intervals. This habit influenced lay people too. While peasants didn't get up for lauds, the bells calling monks to prayer reminded everyone that night was divided and activity was possible even in darkness. This way of seeing time also shaped how day and night were valued. Daylight was prized as the time for visible work, farming, crafting, and trade. Night was for rest, but also for mystery, danger, and hidden activities, home to criminals, spirits, and solitude. Unlike today, where cities buzz with nightlife and work can run 24/7, medieval nights were mostly dead times, a chance to recharge but also a time to be cautious. This close tie between natural time and sleep started to break down with the arrival of artificial light and especially the Industrial Revolution. Factories demanded fixed shifts, no matter the time or season. Gaslight and later electricity let people work well past sunset. This new work-focused economy didn't leave room for split sleep. Broken rest came to be seen as inefficient and a waste of time. Artificial light let people fight their natural rhythms, and society began pushing continuous sleep as the best for health and productivity. So time, once flexible and aligned with nature, became strict and forced a single sleep pattern, wiping out the strange but natural medieval sleep habits. When we think about sleeping today, we imagine a bedroom with a comfy bed, clean sheets, and maybe a nightlight. In the Middle Ages, the sleep setup was very different, shaped by necessity, scarcity, and folk beliefs. One surprising fact to modern ears is that there was no specialized nightwear. The idea of pajamas didn't exist. Most people slept naked, practical because it made laundry easier, or laundry just wasn't done, and it was believed to help regulate body temperature. Others, out of necessity or modesty, slept in the same underwear or simple tunics they wore during the day, especially among lower classes with limited clothes. Interestingly, a common belief was that extra clothes in bed attracted fleas and other bugs, so sleeping with fewer clothes was a basic hygiene practice. The nightcap wasn't just a fashion choice, it served a real purpose, keeping people warm. Medieval houses were hard to heat, and the head loses a lot of body heat. The cap helped hold in warmth through those long nights and offered some basic protection against insects dropping down from walls or ceilings. For those with long hair, it also kept their locks contained and prevented tangling while they slept. Lighting at night was scarce and expensive, which naturally limited what people could do after dark. Tallow or beeswax candles and oil lamps were the main sources of artificial light, but because they were costly and burned quickly, most people lived in darkness once the sun went down. This helped reinforce a two-phase sleep pattern. There weren't many ways to stay up late, and people had to be very careful with their limited light because of fire risk. The flicker of a candle or the faint glow of an oil lamp was the only defense against the overwhelming darkness that filled the home at night. The bed wasn't just for rest, it was also a kind of sanctuary for personal items. People often kept jewelry, religious relics, or lucky charms close by while they slept. These weren't just decorations. They were believed to protect against nighttime dangers, illness, or evil spirits. A small wooden cross, a rosary, or a herb-filled talisman might be tucked under the pillow or hung from the bedpost. This practice shows how deep faith and superstition were back then, with the line between physical and spiritual things blurred, and each object acting like a silent guardian through the uneasy medieval night. While most people fell into a first or second sleep, nights in towns and villages weren't exactly peaceful. Darkness wasn't empty. It was a cloak for lawkeepers, criminals, and the ever-present threat of disaster. Central to this nighttime watch were the serenos, or night watchmen, who patrolled the streets after dark, carrying lanterns, simple weapons, and a horn or bell. Their jobs were many and important. The biggest was fire prevention, a constant danger in wooden cities with thatched roofs. At the first sign of smoke or flame, they'd sound the alarm to wake the community and fight the fire. They were also the night's timekeepers, ringing the hours so people could keep track of time without personal clocks. But their most critical role was keeping order and safety, stopping suspects, questioning people wandering without cause, and breaking up fights or disturbances. They were the eyes and ears of the authorities after dark, a vital part of keeping medieval city life somewhat safe. To keep nighttime chaos in check, medieval cities often had strict curfews and night rules. People weren't allowed on the streets after certain hours unless they had a lantern or a good reason. Church bells announced curfew, and breaking the rules could mean fines, jail time, or worse. These laws aimed not just to stop crime, but also to reduce fire risks and keep order in the dark. Breaking curfew risked being mistaken for a criminal and facing the watchman's punishment. Darkness was perfect cover for crime. Without streetlights, the roads became shadowy mazes where theft, assault, and secret acts thrived. Bandits and robbers worked under night's cover, preying on travelers or anyone brave enough to be outside. Taverns and brothels ran illicit business with less oversight, and secret conspiracies found anonymity under the dark. In such a hostile environment, most people's best defense was to stay locked safely inside. As cities grew, the demand for nighttime lighting soared. Light became a symbol of safety, civilization, and progress. From a few candles in windows to the early public lanterns at key spots, every bit of light pushed back the fear of the dark. This drive to light up the night wasn't just practical, it was cultural and psychological. Illuminating cities bit by bit helped change how people saw the night, turning it from a time of danger and forced rest into a time for more activity, a prelude to the lively nightlife of later eras. Leaving behind monasteries and castles, let's look at the backbone of medieval society, peasants and laborers, and how they managed sleep. For them, rest followed nature's rhythms and necessity, often under tough conditions close to animals. Peasants' lives were tied to natural cycles, and so was their sleep. For most of the medieval population, sleep followed the farming calendar. Daylight marked work, start and end times. During planting and harvest, days were long and rest was short. Peasants woke at dawn and worked until dusk with few breaks. In winter, when days were shorter and field work slowed, nights could be longer and sleep more extended, though cold and lack of food often made true rest hard. Their sleep patterns stayed flexible, adjusting to the demands of the land and weather. There was no set 8-hour sleep goal. The body adjusted to work needs and available light. Peasants' homes were often simple, small 1- or 2-room huts, made of local materials like wood, adobe, or stone with thatched roofs. In many cases, especially in winter to save heat, farm animals shared the living space with the family. Cows, pigs, chickens, and sheep were kept in part of the house or in an attached barn connected to the home. Sleeping under these conditions meant living with the animals' smells, noises, and dirt. The warmth they gave off was a big plus on freezing nights, but it came with dirty conditions and constant bugs and rodents. For many, the barn itself, with its pile of straw, served as a makeshift bedroom, providing a natural mattress and some insulation from the cold ground. The struggle against cold was a constant part of medieval sleep, especially for those who couldn't afford canopy beds or big fireplaces. People came up with practical solutions to warm their beds. One of the most common and effective ways was using stones or bricks heated up in the fire. Before bedtime, these stones or bricks were placed in the hearth or fireplace until they were glowing hot. Then they were carefully wrapped in several layers of thick cloth or rags to avoid burns and tucked under the blankets. They worked like simple rustic hot water bottles, radiating heat for hours and making the bed much more comfortable on cold winter nights. This simple but essential practice shows the resilience and creativity of medieval people trying to find some comfort in tough lives. For many, life in the Middle Ages meant long, difficult journeys, whether for trade, military service, or religious pilgrimage. For travelers and pilgrims, sleep was a necessity under very different conditions than at home, often chaotic or outdoors. For those constantly on the move, rest meant adapting to whatever situation they faced, a mix of discomfort and acceptance. When lucky enough to find an inn, the promise of a roof and bed often came with a chaotic, bustling scene. Medieval inns were busy hubs, and sleeping areas were usually large communal halls packed with beds, cots, and mattresses on the floor. Privacy was non-existent. Rooms were shared, and beds were often shared with strangers. Merchants, soldiers, pilgrims, and locals might all end up sleeping head to foot in the same bed, sharing body heat and making the most of limited space. Noise was constant: snores, coughs, whispered or shouted conversations, the jingling of horse bells coming and going, barking dogs, and the clamor of the tavern below. The air was thick with smells of sweat, animals, beer, and spoiled food. Hygiene was fragile at best. Fleas and other parasites were regular bedfellows. Still, an inn offered shelter from cold, rain, and road dangers, so despite the chaos, it was a welcome relief for exhausted travelers. But inns weren't always available. For many travelers, especially soldiers on campaign, merchants on remote routes, or pilgrims with few resources, sleeping outside was often the reality. This meant finding makeshift shelter under trees, in caves, or, if lucky, inside a simple tent. Medieval tents made from heavy canvas or leather offered only limited protection from wind, rain, and cold. Sleeping on the ground with just a thin layer or a few blankets for insulation was harsh. Dangers were everywhere: wild animals, attackers, and full exposure to the elements. Sleep was light, frequently broken by nature's sounds or constant alertness against threats. For soldiers, sleeping in a military camp meant always being ready to wake up at an alarm, with their gear close by and senses sharp even while resting. For the medieval traveler, sleep was an adventure itself, a constant adjustment to scarcity, lack of privacy, and a world without modern comforts. Children's lives in the Middle Ages were marked by fragility, and their sleep was closely tied to survival. Infant rest was connected to harsh conditions and high mortality rates. Sadly, many children didn't survive to adulthood, falling victim to disease, malnutrition, accidents, or poor sanitation. This harsh reality meant that a child's death wasn't rare but a painful, expected part of life. This shaped how people thought about children's sleep. It was seen as a time of extreme vulnerability. Parents lived in constant worry that their child might not wake up. Infant illnesses, often with fever and convulsions, made sleep restless and risky. Sudden infant death, though not understood, was feared deeply, so parents kept a close watch during their baby's sleep. Co-sleeping with parents provided warmth and constant supervision, a way to make sure the child was breathing, didn't suffocate, or wasn't attacked by rodents or insects. A child's sleep was a constant reminder of how fragile life was. Cradles existed but weren't common everywhere. They were usually simple wooden frames, sometimes with a rocking feature to soothe the baby. But not every family could afford one, so it was common for babies to sleep directly with their parents in the family bed. This co-sleeping was normal in most households, both to stay warm in cold rooms and to make nighttime breastfeeding and watching easier. Caring for infants at night was non-stop. Mothers woke to nurse, change rudimentary cloth diapers, or comfort crying babies. Babies' sleep was often interrupted by hunger, cold, or discomfort, and parents' sleep was broken by the need to care for them. Nighttime for families with small children was full of interruptions, and deep rest was a rare luxury. A cradle, when used, gave the baby a defined space, but closeness and interaction with adults were still crucial for the child's survival and well-being. The way we sleep today, with comfy mattresses, private bedrooms, and the expectation of uninterrupted rest, is actually a pretty recent development. The legacy of medieval sleep, with its broken-up patterns and its role in communal life, helps us understand how our relationship with rest has evolved. The shift to modern sleep was slow but profound, driven by social, technological, and ideological changes. Changing medieval sleep habits into what we know today was a centuries-long journey marked by key moments that reshaped the night. The first big change came with the Enlightenment's focus on reason, productivity, and efficiency. As cities grew and economies got more complex, time started to be seen as a valuable resource. Those fragmented sleep patterns with their wakeful breaks began to feel like wasted time. inefficient and out of step with the new, fast pace of life. Night stopped being a time for spiritual reflection or relaxed socializing and became a period meant solely for recovery before the next day's work. But the real game changer was the Industrial Revolution. Factories ran around the clock, and work was organized into strict shifts, requiring workers to be alert for long hours. To keep production efficient, workers needed to be well rested for their shifts, with minimal time spent awake in between. Clocks became everywhere, and life became more strictly scheduled by artificial time instead of natural cycles of light and dark. A key part of this change was the invention and widespread use of artificial light, starting with oil lamps and cheaper candles, then gas lighting in the early 1800s, and finally electricity by the late 19th century. Artificial light let us stay active long after sunset. Streets lit up, factories kept running through the night, and homes got brighter. Darkness was no longer a barrier to work, fun, or socializing. Night turned into an extension of the day rather than a forced downtime. Without natural darkness to cue us, the old two-phase sleep pattern started to disappear. Along with this came a new idea: the private bedroom. As houses got bigger and the middle and upper classes grew wealthier, people could finally have a dedicated room just for sleeping. This new home design reflected changing social values: more privacy and clear separation of functions in the house. The bedroom became a personal refuge, a space just for rest, protected from others' noise and distractions. With private rooms and the ability to light up the night whenever we wanted, the idea of uninterrupted sleep took hold. Society began to value a solid block of sleep, usually 6 to 8 hours, as the standard for healthy, restorative rest. Interruptions became seen as problems to fix. Sleep became a private, solitary thing, a time to disconnect from the world and recharge both body and mind. So the noisy, fragmented sleep of medieval times quieted down, giving way to the modern night we know today. A night where darkness is no longer a limit but a choice, and sleep a private, straight-through act. Very different from our ancestors' rich, broken-up experience. As we look back at those medieval nights, full of noise, danger, superstition, and split sleep, one big question comes up. Having left those old habits behind and embraced modern sleep, have we really gained or lost something? No doubt we've gained comfort. Our mattresses are softer. Our rooms are private, quiet, and safe. Electric light has freed us from the chains of darkness, letting us stretch the day however we want. We've gained the ideal of continuous sleep, a goal many chase as the key to good health. From a productivity point of view, this shift was a huge success, letting us make the most of every hour, day, and night. But maybe in gaining this, we've lost something too. We've sacrificed a deeper connection with natural cycles of light and dark. We've forgotten how valuable those nighttime wakeful moments were for thinking, creating, or just reflecting. The pressure to get perfect, uninterrupted sleep sometimes causes more stress than rest. We've lost that communal relationship to sleep, where closeness and security came from sharing the night. Understanding the past helps us understand the present, especially when it comes to sleep. Realizing that our current sleep habits are a fairly recent social and technological invention lets us ask if they're really the most natural or best for us. Maybe modern insomnia, the endless search for sleeping pills, or widespread chronic fatigue aren't just individual problems, but signs of a society forcing a sleep rhythm that doesn't fit our biology. So when you turn off your lights tonight and dive into the dark, I invite you to think, can we learn something from those strange medieval nights? Could being more aware of our natural rhythms help us rest better? And if our ancestors saw us sleeping alone in soundproof rooms, wrapped in artificial silence, what would they think of our nighttime habits? The history of sleep isn't just an interesting story from the past, it's a mirror that helps us understand who we are and how we live today. I hope this story relaxed you and gave you a little good history to enjoy. This is Nighttime Scribe, your loyal companion for sleepless nights. If you liked the story, please give it a like and subscribe so you can join this thoughtful night owl community. Thanks for listening. Until next time.